Hello, and welcome to Homegrown KC, a podcast dedicated to exploring Kansas City's fascinating history and sharing stories from its rich past. I'm your host, Laura. Joining me today is Dr. Ann Raab. Dang, I did it. Rob. It's Rob, right?
It's Rob, yeah.
Jinxed myself. I asked her to join us because October, I believe it's 15th this year. Does that sound correct?
Correct, yeah. International Archaeology Day.
Yes. And I've been wanting to have an archaeologist on here for so long. I'm so excited to have you on here.
Here.
I had a class with your husband, Dr. Mark, back when I was in undergrad, and I think I might have had a class with you as well.
Oh, okay.
And my condolences. I know he passed recently.
He did, yes, 3 years ago. I appreciate that.
Oh, it was 3 years ago. I'm sorry. I thought it was more recent, but grief doesn't really have an expiration date.
It doesn't. Which class did you take? Can I ask?
Yeah, I don't remember which one was yours, but his was prehistoric history or something like that at JUCO.
Okay, yeah. World prehistory.
Yes, there we go. That sounds right.
Yeah.
And I also was at a week-long survey training camp with him at one of the state parks.
Yes, yeah, the Missouri Archaeological Society's archaeological training and recordation program. So, yeah. I taught one day of that week for some of the years, but not every year. That was a great program.
Yeah, I was really excited to get on that. That was my first practical archaeological experience.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
So tell us about yourself. Who are you? What's your background? How did you get into archaeology?
Well, it's kind of funny. I actually, and I tell my students this, and it sounds like it's a joke, but it's actually true. I always wanted to be an archaeologist, but I also had a lot of creative influences as well, which could help actually with archaeology. But I didn't really think that archaeology was practical to get into for a career. So when I went to college at AVLA, I majored in theater instead. Which of course,
that's very different.
Very different, and of course sounds crazy practical, right? I actually was going to be a high school drama teacher. That was kind of my goal.
Okay.
But as things happen sometimes when you go to college, what you start with and what you end with is different. And so I did finish my theater degree. I had my daughter, and so I took a break for a while from school. But I never really stopped reading about the stuff that interested me, related to archaeology and paleoanthropology and all of that. And eventually moved to California, and then that's where I decided to go ahead and go back to school. And I went to California State University in Northridge and got my master's degree in anthropology with an emphasis in archaeology. That's actually where I met Mark Raab. And so I completed that, and then came back to Kansas City. He and I came back to the Kansas City area, and that's where I went to University of Kansas and earned my PhD in archaeology, specializing in Missouri, Kansas border war and General Order Number 11.
Okay. Very cool. So can you break down for us what is the difference between archaeology and anthropology?
Good question. So anthropology, it's kind of like the difference between surgery and medicine. Right. So medicine is the larger field. And then, of course, surgery is a subset of that. And then, of course, you specialize typically in particular kinds of surgery. So anthropology is the larger field. That means the study of humans. That's what the word, if you break it down into its component parts, actually means. And there's all kinds of different sub-disciplines within anthropology. There's cultural anthropology, physical anthropology, linguistic anthropology, and there's archaeology. And so depending on which specialty area you're in, which sub-discipline you're in, the main difference is basically the data set that you're using to learn about humans and human culture. And so archaeologists are looking at the material remains, the stuff that gets left behind from people who are no longer here. So that's kind of the specialty that archaeology focuses on within the larger field of anthropology.
Okay, thank you. That is a wonderful analogy that I've never heard before, but I love it.
Thank you.
And years ago, before I decided to focus on history, I thought I would be an archaeologist. Mm-hmm. And I was always asked, oh, so dinosaurs and stuff? So let's just put that out there now. Dinosaurs are not archaeology. That is paleontology.
Correct. Yeah, and people get mixed up often. I mean, there's the whole treasure hunting aspect, and there are a lot of people who are sincerely, genuinely interested in history, and a lot of the influences that you see in the media pretty much just tells you, oh, hey, if you're interested in the human past, just go out and find a site, just dig it up, and try to find something cool. The problem with that people don't realize is that you're basically destroying the archaeological site when you do that, unless you do it right.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if you do it right, I mean, you're still technically destroying it.
Yeah, I mean, if your motive is just to find stuff and sell it, then absolutely you're still treasure hunting. But archaeology is a process as much as the stuff, right? And so, we're trying to answer questions about the human past, the stuff we find as our data set, but it also includes, the dirt that we dig up. And once you dig up a site, you can't dig it up again. Like that part of the site that you dug is now destroyed, basically.
Right.
If you did it in the right way to gather the right data, then you can't tell the story. I use another analogy of like a book. So, people might go through a book and say, oh, I'm just looking for all my favorite words, like big money words, right? And I'm going to cut all those words out of the book, and then I'm just going to burn the rest of the book. Well, you might have a collection, some really cool words, but we don't know what the story is.
Another amazing analogy.
We think about these things a lot as archaeologists. So yeah, treasure hunting is just collecting words and destroying the story. And archaeology is trying to, we want to get all the words so that we can tell the story too. There is a lot of overlap with paleontology. I mean, paleontology deals with the past, but is really focusing on like the fossil plants and animals, including dinosaurs, and is kind of more a subset of geology. But of course, plants and animals and humans interact, so the disciplines kind of work well together, but they are separate.
When I asked you about I'll come back to that question later. Sorry. Since this is for International Archaeology Day, can you tell us what it's about?
So International Archaeology Day is, as you mentioned, October 15th this year. It's kind of the whole month of October, but it's trying to raise awareness of what archaeology really is and how it really works and all the really cool things that it can tell us if we do it correctly. And there's a lot of stuff out there that we need to try to protect without it, getting destroyed before we can properly research it. But there's only so many archaeologists to go around. Mm-hmm. And so the best way to protect and preserve our cultural heritage is to educate as many people as possible about, what's at stake, how archaeology works, and how they can kind of help be good stewards of our past and of the archaeological record. So that's kind of the whole point of it. Plus, it's just cool and fun. But September is actually Missouri Archaeological Month.
Even better.
Yeah.
I did not come across that when I was trying to look all this up.
Yeah.
Well, that's the perfect segue into the question I aborted asking, which is, can you tell us more about your projects? You mentioned that you have focused on archaeology of the border war.
Yeah, the border war and General Order Number 11. So the border war is, and I think a lot of people in the area have at least a passing familiarity, but the Civil War basically started here a good decade before, 7 years. I wouldn't say a decade, 7 years before the Civil War started, with the opening of the Kansas Territory and open questions about whether it would be a free or a slave state. And so, there was this constant fighting back and forth between Missouri and Kansas that the whole nation was watching. Actually, they kind of figured, well, however things go on this border dispute, that's how the whole country's going to go. They were correct. And so it just escalated and it didn't let up after the war started, and it just kind of got worse. And there's a particular event called General Order Number 11 that not as many people know about. It was a depopulation order of a whole district on the Missouri border, Missouri-Kansas, in Missouri on the Kansas border, Jackson County, Cass County, Bates County, and a portion of Verdon County. That was an attempt in 1863 to quelch all of the border conflict after Quantrill rode into Lawrence and killed almost 200 people. So there was a decision made by Brigadier General Thomas Ewing, basically to kick everybody out of that border district, with a few exempted areas in a couple of counties where the Union was encamped, and basically kick everybody out and burn everything down, so that there would be nothing left to support the partisan guerrillas that had been conducting a lot of this conflict on the border. And it's an interesting event because it has a lot of modern parallels. I mean, there are a lot of areas in the world today that have ongoing guerrilla warfare. They have depopulations, entire populations moved and relocated, and so it's an interesting question to look at what happened in the past and compare it to what's going on today, and what lessons can we learn from it, if any. Have we learned anything from it? But it created a pretty unique archaeological landscape, especially in Bates County where I work, because that was the one county where the entire county, it didn't have any exempted areas. It was the whole county. Everybody had to go, and the whole county got burned to the ground. And then, people came back 2-3 years later to absolutely nothing left, with 2-3 years of back taxes. And
that sucks.
Welcome home, rebuild if you can, right? And a lot of people didn't. So it really had a huge and lasting impact on the people there, regardless of what side of the conflict they were on.
Mm-hmm.
And archaeologically, that's not something that's really been explored in depth. And so that's what I spend a lot of my time working on in Bates County.
I hadn't realized that they had raised the whole county down there.
Yeah. And also, in Bates County as well, the very first engagement of African-American soldiers in the Civil War happened in Bates County in 1862 at the Battle of Island Mound. So that's another project that I worked on as well.
Let's circle back to that in a minute. Can you tell us more about the sites that you've worked on in Bates County, and why the General Order 11 created this archaeological phenomenon and what it looks like?
Yeah, it's kind of almost like a Pompeii in a sense, because people had to, people were just trying to live their lives, right, in the midst of this conflict. And the impact on the archaeological record is subtle, but if you kind of are asking the right questions, you kind of know what to look for. So when people are living in an environment that's constantly in conflict, you don't know how safe you are, your regular avenues of getting resources, materials, help, aren't necessarily consistent or reliable. People make different choices about where they direct their resources. And those choices show up in the archaeological record. And so, they spend a lot of their resources just maintaining their infrastructure, and then they reuse a lot of the stuff they had because they can't always get new stuff. People did that a lot back then anyway, but it's even more pronounced. And doesn't matter how rich you are, doesn't matter how poor you are. That's kind of a pattern that we see in the archaeological record at this time. And economically speaking, that whole area was pretty adversely affected for decades after the Civil War. It had a ripple effect that you can see again in how people were directing their resources with what's left in the archaeological record. But in terms of the event itself, we found sites that had clearly been burned to the ground. The structures, even the rock foundations had changed color and cracked because of the intense heat of the fire. Clumps of 19th century glass melted together, and it's pretty striking when you hit that layer and you think, oh, this is why they call it the burnt district, because all that was left were some chimneys sticking up here and there, and everything got burned down and had to be rebuilt or abandoned. So there's a lot that's still there, kind of like Pompeii. People had to kind of grab what they could and leave within a very short period of time. I mean, the time that the order was signed and the time that people had to get out or be shot on site was 2 weeks.
Wow.
So yeah, it's an interesting landscape.
So when you're excavating in there, is there like a specific house or something that you're excavating?
Well, what I really did want to focus on were like farmsteads, right? So people's homes where they were living, because this border district, it's not a distinct battlefield like some of the great battlefield sites that we have preserved in the area, right? So Wilson's Creek is an example of that. And there's been some really incredible archaeological work done on those battlefields, but that's an actual battlefield where you have troop movements and, all the artillery and all of that. But the entire landscape was a conflict zone, but in a very different way. So I wanted to see how this affected people's day-to-day lives. So that's why I sought out farmsteads. And so you have to do a lot of research and check, historical documents to see, where were people, where was it that people were living, and were they there at the time in question, and did they come back? And so find those structures. And some of it, like many of them, the ones that were a couple of sites in particular in Bates County excavated, there was no evidence on the surface that there was a house there, except there was a well in the area. But you didn't have to go too far to find the structures.
Yeah. Well, what about the Battle of Island Mound? What does that site look like?
The Battle of Island Mound is an interesting site as well, because this is, and this was work that I had done that you would call, I guess, public archaeology, in conjunction with the Missouri State Parks and the Department of Natural Resources, because Missouri State Parks had purchased a plot of land associated with the Battle of Island Mound, where there had been a house for a very brief period of time that the troops, their unit was called the 1st Kansas Colored Volunteer Infantry, was their official name. And they commandeered this farm owned by the Toothman family, and their job was to kind of roust out some Confederate guerrillas that were hiding out on the swampy area called Island Mound or Hog Island, and kind of causing trouble in the area. So they were sent in to kind of roust them out and fight them. So the site that the state owns is where the Toothman Farm had been, but it got burned down in Order 11 as well. The Battle of Isla Mound happened in October of 1862, and Order number 11 was in September of 1863. And so it wasn't long after the battle that house burned down. It was replaced in the 1870s by a Methodist church, which then also was taken down and moved. And so it was kind of a detective process trying to figure out where that house probably had been. So that site was, again, it was about little clues on the landscape. There was some military stuff, bullets and belt buckles and buttons, and but that were typical of an encampment, not a battle, because the battle had taken place in another location not far away.
Okay.
So yeah, little bits and pieces and clues and a lot of detective work.
Are there any other notable projects in the area that you've worked on?
Let's see. I have spent the bulk of my time working on the projects in Bates County. I ran field schools there for years, but I also worked, as I mentioned, with the Missouri Archaeological Society with their training program. I was one of the people who kind of helped create the curriculum for that program, and was there at Knob Noster and at Ararock, different couple of places like that. And then the other work that I did actually was working on some extant burials and at a rock art site actually in Baja, California.
Wow.
Baja, California, not too far, kind of between Cabo San Lucas and then the capital of the southern state of Baja, which is La Paz. So kind of between those two areas is where I had also done some work on some pre-contact indigenous burials and rock art sites that were there.
That sounds amazing.
That was pretty cool. And I did a little tiny bit of work out on another site in California. It was an island, San Clemente Island. That's where my husband Mark had done decades of work. And it was another prehistoric site that dated back to 10,000 years there on the coast.
Can you describe the differences in your methodology and overall approach between this pre-contact site and these sites here in Missouri that you've worked on?
So, in general terms, archaeology is archaeology, right? It doesn't really matter whether it's historic, prehistoric, what it is. You are still going to have the same general approach in that you want to have a good research question, right? And you want to get your project all organized, figure out what your desired data set is and your methods for excavating. And it really has to do with the differences, what kind of data do you have available, right? So for a prehistoric site, there are no historical records to research.
No written records.
Yeah, right. But you might have previous research from other people in the area. And that might help you. Whereas, of course, with the work that I do, there could very well be some written records that I can access to help give me some context. But you still want to be careful with the written record, right? Because everything that's written is biased.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
you got to think about who wrote it, why they wrote it, who the intended audience was.
What was included, what was excluded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, everything that's written has a bias, and that's not necessarily bad. But you have to take that into account. And you don't want it to direct what you think your conclusions will be. Just use it as one data set and then let the archaeology speak for itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of times the dating methods are some of the bigger difference, right? So with my sites, they're 150, 175, maybe 200 years old. That's too young for radiocarbon dating. So I can't use any of those tools to date the sites, but I have to use things like maker's marks on the back of plates or pottery that I find, or, different kind of key indicators on types of bottles or dates on coins, or, there's a lot of historical research that goes into figuring out date ranges on certain artifacts in historical archaeology, because I can't just test them. Whereas with prehistoric, you can use radiocarbon dating, or depending on what it is you're doing, how far back it goes, other different kinds of geological types of dating, chemical dating, etc. But there's a lot of it's very similar, very, very similar. The goals are the same.
I spent a lot of time during undergrad and then graduate school working with pottery shards and glass to determine dating, and I found it really fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's very cool stuff.
While you were talking about your source material and your data, I wondered, do you have any diaries or anything written by the people who had to flee?
From those sites?
Yeah.
Sometimes there are. I haven't been lucky enough to have diaries from the exact people at the sites where I've been excavating. Sometimes you do, but I have not. There have been a couple of newspaper accounts. One of the sites I excavated in Bates County, there was a newspaper article about a couple of the sons that had been arrested for being guerrillas. So there's kind of a couple of passing mentions. There was, on the other site that I excavated, in one of the histories that was written about Bates County, the individual J.J. Clark was one of the wealthier people in the county, if not maybe the wealthiest person in the county. So he had a little page write-up in the history of Bates County that was written in 1890.
Okay.
So sometimes you do find that, which can be very helpful. There's tax records, a tax record from 1863 that I was able to access that gave me some information as well.
Do you have a favorite project or a least favorite project?
I think definitely my favorite project has got to be my ongoing work in Bates County. I think it's fascinating. I think, I love educating people about Order 11 because, like I said, not everybody knows about it. I think it's really important and relevant. It seems like no matter where I go there in Bates County, whatever site I pick, there's always lots of stuff to work with and to find. And I've been working there since 2007, with a few years off because of COVID now. But all of the people down there, I've had so much support and interest, and it's like a second home to me down there. So absolutely, hands down, that's got to be my favorite kind of ongoing project. I don't really have a least favorite project, to be honest. I've never worked on a site where I thought, well, that was awful. I did, actually one that I forgot to mention, I went and I did about a week's work with a group of students at a field school through Washburn University in Kansas, and at the site of Nicodemus, which is way up there in that northwest corner of Kansas. And Nicodemus is the longest standing African American community. It was established as an all Black community there, and it was probably one of the, I would say, if there's a like a more difficult project. That one was that because it was very hot, and the stuff was kind of few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
You're digging a lot to find very little,
Yeah.
which is always a challenge. But it was still a very cool site, very fascinating site, and I picked a good spot. I found an outhouse, and so we were able to do some work there. So I think if you find a site where you're not finding much, that's probably, I don't know if least favorite, but most challenging, keeping the motivation going.
Yeah.
But the research question to me is always still fascinating.
I've passed through Nicodemus. I know that all the descendants still get together once a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm sure that they loved having you there and appreciated all your work on their behalf.
Yeah, no, it was great. There were a lot of students from Howard University there working as well, so it was really, really great.
So, trying to decide which question I want to ask next. Let's stick with this. So, ongoing projects. So, what is next then?
Right now, I'm still desperately trying to focus on converting my dissertation to a book. I have a university press that wants me to give them a prospectus, and so I'm trying to force myself between all of my teaching commitments to get that finally done and submitted. So I've kind of been putting some of my field work on a hiatus to try to make myself do that.
Okay, well, quick pause. What is your dissertation on?
My dissertation was on the border war and Order Number 11 and my work in Bates County.
Okay, no, sorry. I specifically meant like, what was your thesis?
Oh, the thesis. So my thesis was, are you asking for the title or just what it's about?
Yeah, like,
because
I'm researching X because I think X.
Yes. So my hypothesis was that Order Number 11 had a long-lasting and negative impact on Bates County, not just during the war, but for an extended period after. And so that's what I was looking to see if I could research and what my findings found, at least in a preliminary sense, was that yes, it did in fact have a long-lasting negative impact on the residents there in Bates County. So the book is I'm trying to take that information, and then of course I have done research in Bates County since then that is not incorporated into my dissertation because I got my PhD in 2012, and so it's been a while. So I want to put some new information in there and include the Battle of Island Mound in the story and kind of tie it a little bit more directly to kind of some modern issues that I think it could help solve.
Okay.
So working on that, but I'm also still attending conferences. I'm going to Lisbon in January for the Society for Historical Archaeology conference. I'm super excited.
Oh, nice. I didn't know they were going to Lisbon.
Yeah. They do an international one every 3 years or so.
And you mentioned that you're teaching.
Yes.
Where do you teach at?
I teach at Longview Community College in Lee Summit. So that's where I primarily do all of my teaching kind of in person and online.
What classes do you currently offer?
Currently, it's mostly cultural anthropology and then general anthropology, which looks at all the different subfields that I mentioned at the top of the podcast. And so we also have like a physical anthropology class that I'm trying to resurrect, and then an archaeology class I'm trying to resurrect. So I'm trying to add some other stuff in there as well.
I imagine COVID had a negative impact on all aspects of your work, including the teaching.
Yeah. I did a lot of virtual teaching during that time, which is fine. I mean, it's a great way to adapt and continue.
Mm-hmm. Now that we're getting back to normal, so to speak, are you going to resume excavation work?
I hope to. I had a site that I had just started kind of working on in Bates County. It was like right on the grounds of the museum. And I was working with a colleague who's a historian at UMKC, Dr. Diane Moody-Burke. And
Yeah, she's wonderful. I have to get her on here someday.
yeah, she's fascinating. She's great work. And there was a program that she had been doing that was kind of a teacher education program through the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it was a week-long program about the border war. And so they had teachers from all around the country who would come in for this week-long class. And one of the days, they would come to Bates County and they would visit whatever archaeological site I was working on, and I would teach them how archaeology works. And they'd learn about all the history in Bates County, and it was a really, really great day. And so I had just a couple of times where I was doing a very small excavation there on the grounds of the museum itself. And I was just starting to really find some interesting stuff, and then COVID hit, and so it's been a while since I've been able to get out there, but I'm hoping to be able to resume that. There's actually a really great, I forgot to mention it, series on PBS called History from the Ground Up, and people can Google it and find it. And stream it online. And it's kind of the history of the United States through the lens of archaeology. It was season 2. There's a couple of episodes in particular that actually part of the episodes were in Bates County. And if you don't blink, you'll get to see me in there for a couple of minutes here and there talking about the work in Bates County. But those are some
that's cool. Things. Definitely have to look up that show. What did you say it was called again? From the Ground Up?
History, America from the Ground Up is what it's called.
America from the Ground Up. Yeah, definitely going to look that up.
Yeah.
So what are some of the greatest challenges that you've faced in your career?
I think switching careers was a big challenge. Deciding to go back to school and get a master's and a PhD. It took me like 7 years to get my master's because I did it part-time, and then another 6 years to get my PhD, which I did full-time. And so that was, in itself, its own challenge. And then, of course, being a college professor, I think people have the sense that it's an easy gig, right? Now you get your PhD and then you get a tenured teaching job and you just kind of glide. But there's a lot of PhDs out there and not a lot of teaching positions.
Mm-hmm. And I think of teaching positions available, even a few of them are tenured, yes?
Right, yeah. And, when you get a tenured teaching position, you stay in it.
Mm-hmm.
You'd rarely move out of that position unless you're literally completely changing what you're doing in your life. And so I had to teach part-time at multiple places for years before I got a full-time position. And a lot of people, they teach part-time in multiple places for the entirety of the career. It's very exhausting. You don't have benefits. The pay is low. And so I think finally getting to a point where I have my full-time position and I finished my probationary period and now I'm technically tenured as far as community college's tenure. I feel finally like I can kind of maybe relax a little bit and turn back to doing work on some of the stuff that I had been doing before.
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably the biggest challenge.
Never mind. Do you have any advice that you would offer to those who would like to pursue archaeology?
Sure. Yeah, I think kind of what you did was an excellent example. Get an opportunity to actually go out into the field and try it. There are a lot of people who, in theory, like they love the idea of archaeology because I think it's inherently cool and it's fun, right?
Yes.
But as you can attest, being out in the field and excavating isn't necessarily for everybody, right? It can be hot. You can get, all kinds of bug bites. I did get a really nasty case of poison ivy, actually, when I was working at the Battle of Island Mound site. I'd never been allergic to it before. I'm like, well, I guess now I am. And that was a kind of a miserable summer after that for a while.
Yes.
So that would, I guess, be another challenge, is the environmental challenges. But, and it's also, it's not, it's not Indiana Jones. We're not, he's probably one of the worst archaeologists out there. He destroys every site he touches. I love him though, but
yeah, it's a fun movie, but not the least bit accurate or helpful to the profession as a whole.
Yeah. But there's a lot of time when you're hot and sweaty and it's buggy and you're just digging a hole in the dirt and you're not finding anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, when you do, sometimes it's like, oh, it's a rusty nail. Sweet. I found something today. So that kind of boredom, I guess, can be difficult for people to deal with if they don't balance it out with, an idea what the larger goal is and the research question and kind of what you're contributing to. And so I think it's a great idea to get some actual experience early on.
Mm-hmm.
So that you can really, really see, is this actually for me? And
I second that. Get as much experience as you can as early as you can.
Yeah.
Because I had the survey and I did my field school, which my field school was a dream. And then I got my first technical job, a technician, I think it was, field tech. And like you said, we were hot. We had to work in the rain, and I was like, what the hell are we doing out here?
Right.
And we found nothing, and that was like, okay, I'm done now.
Yeah. Yeah. But you meet people, you make connections, you network, getting into, if you want to get into the field of archaeology, because there's more to do in archaeology than just teaching, at a college. There's, the field archaeology, the public archaeology, where called cultural resource management, where they need field techs all the time to excavate sites. And, it's a small world of archaeologists who all kind of know each other. And the more work you do, the more people you meet, the more, it's easier to get that first gig, right? It's like, oh, I remember you, or the person that you worked with can recommend you to the person they know.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of it's easier to get subsequent work. And so that would be, and the other thing too with the field school, don't worry about going somewhere that sounds kind of super cool and sexy. Like, you don't have to go to Greece for your first field school. Like, that might be awesome if you do, but there's plenty of really, really great field schools locally in the region where you're going to learn the skills you need, and that's the key thing. Learning the field skills. Be able to go into any site at all, set up a excavation unit, excavate it properly, keep good records. All that's the key thing.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one question that I missed earlier.
Sure.
What happens to all of the artifacts after you dig them up? Where do they go?
That's a great question. So they go into some kind of a conservation facility, right? So I don't keep them when the sites that I've excavated on are private property, and so I've in advance, before I do any digging, I work with the landowner and kind of explain what's going on and how it works, and they agreed to donate all of the artifacts to conservation facility, which in the case of my Bates County work is at the University of Kansas. So they keep it all in a facility that's got the proper humidity, proper temperature, right? They have a database, a copy of my whole database. Other researchers have access to it if they want to come in and look at the stuff and reanalyze it with different questions. Students can work with the stuff for projects. And so making that stuff available publicly is a huge, huge, important part of what we do.
Right. There's no point in getting it out of the ground where it's relatively safe to not then take care of it.
Correct.
And that is another possible job if you go into archaeology, is the lab work.
Oh, the lab work stuff is so important. Yeah. I had one of my field school students who that's what all she really wanted to do. And I was like, I wanted to kiss her feet. It's like, yes, please, you're awesome. And that's what she does now. That's her job. She's gotten lots of jobs doing just that. So, yeah.
I super loved the lab work, way more, I think, than being in the field. When I was in graduate school, I was a class / summer project that I worked on, and that would be an ideal job. Yeah. No, it's a great job. Well, we are, the puppies are getting where they want attention, but we're about done. Do you have anything else that you wanted to tell us about?
There is, I do have a Facebook page for those who are still on Facebook. I haven't quite been motivated enough to also create an Instagram account for it, but Bates County, Missouri Archaeology Facebook page. And so I post stuff of interest there, local jobs. When I hear about them, I'll post them, events, excavation, anything kind of going on locally, I'll post that there. So if people if they're on Facebook and they want to seek out that page and like it, you'll get to see things on there. For instance, for Missouri Archaeology Month, on the 29th of September, from 2:30 to 4 p.m. at Longview Community College, Dr. Melissa Eaton, who is the other anthropologist there, also an archaeologist, and I are putting on an event where we're going to be doing presentations about our respective work in Missouri archaeology, answering people's questions about recording archaeological sites, that kind of a thing. And that's going to be on the campus center, in the campus center, room 241, open to the public. Parking on campus is free, 2:30 to 4 p.m. on the 29th of September.
That sounds so cool. Let me look up that day real quick, because if I don't have to work, I'd love to go.
Oh, yeah, please do. And I also put that information on the Bates County, Missouri Archaeology Facebook page.
Yeah, I will make sure to share that on my social medias as well.
Okay, awesome.
29th. Oh, that's a Thursday. I'd have to take off work. I might still do that.
Great.
Anything else you wanted to tell us?
I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
You too.
Cheers.
Bye.
Seem to shake this feeling, and I can't seem to get you off my mind. Thought I lost my nerve see